In this video, I'm going to be showing you guys how to use Redshift to make really fast renders that look really great with minimal effort. In this case, we're going to be looking specifically at doing their dome light, which ultimately just makes lighting kind of a non-issue. First things first, you do have to actually have a license for it. So if you're a student, you can get it for, I think, $12 a year right now through Maxon. Well worth it. It's so much faster than Arnold. This render in Arnold took about 7 minutes, and Redshift took about 45 seconds on an old video card. And then this frog mesh is stupidly dense. It's like 200,000 polys. So take that into account as well. With a leaner mesh or a more reasonable mesh, you could definitely do things much faster than I am here. First things first, we need to download and load in the plugin. I'm going to assume you've already gone to Maxon and gotten a license for it. Under products, you can see here we have Redshift. They have a bunch of other things that are fantastic. Well worth it. If you're a student, again, you can get this for about $12 a year. It's an unbelievable deal, really. So once we have this installed, we just need to go to Windows, Settings and Preferences, and then, I'm sorry, that is not where we go. We go to Windows, Settings and Preferences, and Plugin Manager. And then under here, somewhere in this list, you'll see Redshift for Maya. Mine's at the top. Usually it's towards the bottom here. Just make sure you have it loaded and auto-load if you plan to use it regularly. That'll automatically make it come up whenever you start up Maya. Once you load it in, you'll notice over here, we do have a shelf now for Redshift that comes baked in with some basic functions here. We also have a Redshift menu, which has some of all our options actually. And then we have under the gear set here, you can now render using Redshift. And if you do want to render using Redshift, you do need to select it. Otherwise it will default to something else. The Skydome light we're going to use today to render this image and render it very quickly uses HDRI images specifically in order to light your scene. It's a really powerful way to work. It's a really fast way to work. And it's actually even fun. My favorite place to get any HDRIs is from Polyhaven. This is a wonderful source. If you just go to Assets here and go to HDRIs, there's literally hundreds and hundreds of HDRIs you can download for free. I'm not really sure why this is possible, but I'm very happy about it. It's great. You can see here, if you look at these, they give the sample of the actual image, and then give you a sense of what these the different reflection maps, diffuse maps are going to look like down here on the little sphere. So it kind of gives you a sense of what kind of lighting you're going to get when you download these. I've already taken the liberty of downloading a few. So I have this one, the Rainforest Trail, this interior space, this evening kind of view here, and then this more generic, what they call it, the pure sky, but just a more generic high contrast image. So that's what we're going to be using. Before we begin, let's set up a couple render settings as well, just to make our life a little bit easier. I'm going to go up to my render settings right here, a little clapboard with the gear on it. Again, make sure that you have Redshift selected. I can skip all this stuff for now. For right now, we're just doing test images. I don't need this to be full 1080. I'm just going to drop down to HD 720. You can even go down to HD 540. That'll have the right aspect ratio, but just cut down on some render time. Under basic functions, I'm going to turn my quality to low, so it'll render much faster. You're going to find out that a lot of images have tons of noise. Turning on the denoising option and selecting optics, I think it defaults to the Alt single pass, but optics I think tends to look the best, will make your images look a lot better. I don't feel like it takes a lot of extra time, but if you're trying to do super fast stuff, you can turn this off until you do your final render. That's enough for right now for the settings. Let's go ahead and set up our basic scene. So I have this model here. There's really not much going on. It's just basically a lighting sample with something of interest, the frog. This frog's mesh is crazy dense. We're looking at about 160,000 polys. So that'll slow our render down quite a bit. I'm also working on an older computer, older now. I have a 1080 Ti video card. Redshift specifically works with real-time ray tracing. So if you have an RTX card, 2080, 3080, something like this, you're going to get way faster results than what I'm getting here. So even faster. One thing you do need to have is you do want to make sure you're using Redshift shaders. So it's not a big deal. Just going to go into my Hypershade here. I already have the shader set up. I'm going to set up one of them for you guys so you can see how this works. Sorry, my computer's chunking up on me. So I'm just going to go to Create, and I'll choose Redshift Shader Surface and just choose Redshift Standard Material. So that gives us this one here. Redshift works best with its own shaders. If you want that high speed, you're going to want to replace your shaders with the Redshift shaders. An easy way to do this is you can just select your current shader, go to Edit, and choose Select Materials from Objects. So that would select the current material. I'm assuming it would not be a Redshift shader. Then you just right-click on the Redshift shader and choose Assign Material to Selection. And then ultimately, it'll replace this with the Redshift shader, and then you can redial in your settings. I'm not going to do this, of course, because I already have mine set. One thing I will note, though, is when you're working with Redshift, it'll do reflections faster than any renderer I've ever seen. That being said, if you don't need them, go into your reflection setting and crank this value up. This will remove reflections more or less from your material and make it render way faster. So keep that in mind if you're trying to go for the highest speed possible. The frog has already been replaced with all Redshift shaders, as has the rest of the scene here. I have to admit, I haven't tested to see if it works with basic Maya shaders. So I guess I should test that too at some point. But that's not the point of this video. In this scene, I also added in just a base environment here. It's just a, if you go out to the perspective view here, we're just looking at just a box. So just something to simulate an interior space with. I'll turn that off for the moment. It will definitely add a bit of rendering time to this to figure out all the bounced light. So I'm going to keep it off for our first few renders, but I'll show you some renders later with it being utilized. Okay, it's time to add in our sky dome light. I'm just going to go to Redshift and click on lights. I keep saying sky dome light because that's what Arnold says. This is the Redshift dome light, my bad. So here's the dome light in here. Just pops up as a hemisphere in our scene. I'm going to leave it in its default position right now. I'm going to hit Control A with it selected to bring up the attribute editor. And here under texture, I want to load in my HDRI image. I'm going to click on the folder here under HDRIs. I'm going to start with the, let's see here, the pure sky image. Just because it's high contrast, it'll be a little bit easier to see some of the effects here. Just to note, if you want to play with the image a little bit in terms of brightness or intensity, if it's not bright enough or too intense, you can play with your intensity and your exposure settings to play with how much light it's bathing the scene with. If I click on 7 in the viewport here, you'll notice it kind of washes out the scene. If you're going to look at the lighting effect on the scene, you're going to need to do it through Redshift. So our first 3 buttons here pretty much do the same thing. The render button here will render immediately their view. The Redshift render view will bring up the render view. The render will actually render it. The IPR will prepare to do an IPR. I'm just going to bring up the render view directly. And I'm going to hit the button here. This is from a past render. And you can see how fast that rendered. We got a render in 2.87 seconds. Pretty incredible. And again, my video card is a little bit of an older one. One quick note here, which I think I forgot to mention, which is when you do a render, the HDRI image will show up in the background. If you go into your attribute editor for the dome light, under environment, you can just click on background and it will turn off this the HDRI in your image, and you'll just get the lighting from it. This button here is the IPR renderer, so as long as this is clicked, it's going to, if you make any change in the scene, it's going to keep re-rendering on the fly. Let's stick to this to the side for the moment. The main thing you're going to want to do is rotate this skybox to affect and change the lighting. You can see it happening here. You can also see that it's happening in a bucket view, so it's making it really hard to kind of see the changes on the fly. I'm going to turn off bucket view, where this button right here, and that gives me a more kind of general overview of what we're looking at. In fact, I might even try, I'm going to do a crop, so it just does this spot right in here, and that allows me to play with my lighting in just that one area. Let's make this a little bit bigger. I want to see how it's affecting the shadows as well. So the idea is I can just rotate this light and you can see how it's changing the lighting in the shot, in the render. So I'm going to try something like this just for demo purposes. Once I get what I want, I can turn off the crop. It'll render the whole scene. And then you can also, if you prefer, you can switch back to bucket render now that you have what you're looking for. You can see the noise popping up there. I think there's a button here. Yeah, this is the non-denoise. You can see all the noise going on in here. And then if you click this button back off, it'll show you the denoised version. So once I have a render that I'm happy with, I can go ahead and select, change my settings again. So let's actually just close this for the moment. So under here, I can now go up to the very high or high quality, whatever you would like to go to. You can play with some of these settings here. By the way, if you are do have a hardware ray tracing card, you want to have this button selected. It defaults to that. So if you have an RTS card, definitely have that selected. It'll really increase your rendering time. I'm going to switch up to my full HD 1080 now that I like my render. And that's really all I need to do. At that point, I can just do my regular render. And we'll see that this one takes a bit longer to do, but should still be extremely fast. So it just finished. We're looking at 16 seconds for that render. Again, we don't have the interior space, so that ultimately the render is going to be, that'll be a lot slower in that render, but still way faster than you'd ever get in any other rendering engine that I have ever used. For comparative sake, I'll go ahead and do it though, so you guys can see. I'm just going to turn my environment on. One thing that's worth noting here, if you're going to play with the same sort of trick, if you select your object here under, press Control A for attributes, under render stats, I've turned cast shadows off so it doesn't cast shadows on my frog. And I've also, you might have noticed that it's invisible when I'm looking on the side that I'm looking through. For that, I just turned off double-sided and then clicked on opposite, so it makes the opposite side visible. It's a great trick for doing interior spaces. All right, let's check out how long the render time is with an interior space. I'll go back to my camera and once again hit the render button. I'll pause while it's doing this so we can, you don't have to wait and watch it. You might want to see a little bit just to see that it's still going insanely fast. Actually, while this is going on, I'll tell you too, I had Substance Painter open while I was doing this before, and it was sucking up tons of memory from my computer and made this about 15 to 20 times slower. So Redshift is a big memory hog. Keep your programs closed that you don't need. And actually, this is so close to finishing, I guess I'll just let it finish. What do we got for the interior space? We're looking at denoise, 43 seconds. Pretty darn impressive for a render that looks this good. And then being able to light it pretty much instantaneously. I will end today by showing you some sample renders from the other HDRI images I've downloaded so you can get a sense of the variation you can get. I should also mention you can combine the dome light with traditional lights so you can get more control over the lighting scenario. I should also mention for all of you that have grown up on Arnold, you're used to, when you're rendering, using the render sequence, which was, as far as I understand, it's Maya's way of getting around some licensing issues. If you're going to render with Redshift, you should use the batch renderer. However, this is a legitimate full license of Redshift. The batch renderer basically, you just need to set your settings in here like you would for the render sequence. So, putting your file name, all this stuff here, setting your correct camera, making sure your resolution is correct as well. And of course, most importantly, on your image format, choosing, I'm sorry, not under the image format, the PNG, making sure that you're choosing an image format that allows you to render an animation. So putting your number of frames, whatever it is, by frame 1, padding, it's always good to have. And then when you have your rendering set, go ahead and save your file out. It'll save your render settings with it. and then just hit render and batch render, and it should render out the whole thing using Redshift. So good luck to everyone. I hope this has been helpful, and happy rendering.